To say that Dustin Rhodes has had a lot of ups and downs during his professional wrestling career would be a massive understatement, having been both blessed and cursed with a WWF character that, in a way, took focus of how good of a pro wrestler he truly was. The vast majority of wrestling fans would know Dustin best for his Goldust character, a gimmick that divided a lot of people due to how radical it was, at least in the early days. In late 1995 and more so in 1996, the Goldust gimmick got a lot of people talking, and thanks to Dustin going all in with the character and never letting up even in the face of a lot of controversy and scrutiny, Goldust became a solid WWF attraction that always got a reaction, at least in the early days. When someone becomes so defined by their gimmick and when the character overshadows the in-ring work, sometimes fans can get thrown off guard when they see that gimmick get completely replaced with something else. And in the case of Dustin Rhodes, he had to deal with switching from one radical gimmick in one promotion to another radical gimmick in another. Even though the character that Dustin would portray in WCW would make it to TV, unforeseen circumstances led to this new gimmick getting shut down before it even got started. And in Vince Russo's WCW, the only way to deal with this was to work the audience and viewers at home to try and salvage something from this remarkable failure. Today's video will look at the 7 character in WCW. Dustin Rhodes began working in 1988 in the Florida region before debuting in World Championship Wrestling later in the year. He left WCW to work in Japan, Memphis, and even the WWF, where he would wrestle at the 1991 Royal Rumble, teaming up with his father Dusty Rhodes to take on Ted DiBiase and Virgil. Immediately following the Royal Rumble, both Dusty and Dustin headed back to WCW, and it was during this run from 91 to 95 where Dustin Rhodes would make a name for himself, forming a tag team with Barry Windham and also becoming quite successful as a single superstar, even becoming a 2-time United States champion. The Dustin that wrestled during this time period, known as the Natural, was a no-nonsense Texan who really didn't have much of a gimmick to speak of, and he got by just fine with his in-ring abilities, as did many other superstars in WCW during this time period. But when Dustin jumped over to the WWF, he pretty much went from having no real wrestling character at all to having one of the most outlandish gimmicks of all time. One that would push a lot of buttons and one that would create a ton of controversy for both Dustin and the WWF itself. You have to remember that Goldust debuted in late 95. The general media and even society was very different in the mid-90s, and when Goldust appeared on TV as a wrestling villain, with promos laced with innuendo and matches where Goldust would literally touch and feel his opponents, well, some viewers didn't know how to take that. Those of you who watched the Reliving the War series on my channel would know that there was definitely a period of time when Dustin too had to get used to the gimmick, but during the spring of 1996, the character became extremely entertaining to watch, at least in my opinion anyway. Dustin found a really nice balance of being a villain, being a little erotic, and also adding a little comedy in there too, and what we ended up getting was one of the most original and intriguing gimmicks of the mid-90s. Sure, it wasn't for everyone, but when you see some of the other nonsense the WWF put on TV during this time period, Goldust was actually a breath of fresh air. Dustin got comfortable with the gimmick and the character would get revamped over the next 3 years or so with varying degrees of success. Goldust would have a babyface run in 1997, but by the end of the year he turned heel again by eventually becoming the artist formerly known as Goldust. Dustin would also mimic other wrestlers and celebrities during 1998, and he took part in a weird angle where he would pretend to be a born-again Christian, only to reveal that the second coming that he was preaching about was actually the return of the Goldust gimmick. So, as you can probably tell here, Dustin Rhodes was a real character-driven superstar during his days in the World Wrestling Federation, and this of course has its advantages and disadvantages. Even though Dustin was one of the better in-ring superstars the WWF had during this time period, the company had made the Goldust character so out there and so outlandish that trying to do anything else with Dustin, at least in the WWF, would always get overshadowed by his former gimmick. This isn't so bad if you're someone like Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock, where you can also be yourself a little while cutting promos and working matches, but for someone like Dustin Rhodes, that big old Texas boy who was once called the Natural, well, he'd be seemingly stuck with the Goldust gimmick throughout his entire WWF career, whether he liked it or not. Goldust left the World Wrestling Federation in June of 1999, and shortly afterwards he signed a contract that would see him return to World Championship Wrestling. Someone else who also left the WWF to join WCW around this same time was Vince Russo, and while we can't confirm the exact dates of the signings, we do know that Vince Russo was writing for WCW just before Dustin made his TV return. Of course, WCW would not be able to use the Goldust gimmick, the very gimmick that had defined Dustin for the past 4 years or so. WCW could have allowed Dustin to work as the natural Dustin Rhodes again, but this was Vince Russo's WCW of 1999. There's no way the guy who once portrayed Goldust was going to come back and work matches without some sort of character. Some sort of variation of the Goldust character would have been fine, some sort of gimmick that maybe looked like Goldust but it was still different. Hell, even AEW done this exact thing and it worked out fine for Dustin. This wouldn't be the case here in 1999 though. Dustin's new character would be named Seven. He'd look like a cross between Uncle Fester and the creepy guy from the Poltergeist movies, and it really makes you realise how easy it is for creative to completely miss the mark when it comes to wrestling characters, or indeed the wrestlers themselves. It's been said that the look of the Seven character was based on the movie Dark City and the characters in that movie known as the Strangers, but it just doesn't translate well to a wrestling gimmick at all. Now, no matter how bad something is, or no matter how much something has been shit on, there's always, and I mean always, people out there who actually liked certain gimmicks and characters, and I'm sure some people out there thought that this Seven character maybe had some potential, but even if it did, it would never get realised, as the Seven character would get shut down, not by World Championship Wrestling, not by Dustin Rhodes, not even by Vince Russo, but by Turner Broadcasting itself. A promo aired on the October 11th, 1999 episode of WCW Nitro, where we saw a kid sleeping in his bedroom. A voice says, "Awaken, my son, who is under your bed, who is in your closet, who is at your window?" The kid looks out the window and there is Seven. He's kinda floating or levitating at the window itself. Seven says, "Come to me and live forever, join me in complete bliss." Now, sleep, my child. Can you take a guess what was wrong with this, or rather what people outside of the wacky world of wrestling may have thought? The kid puts his hand on the window, and when he turns to the camera, his eyes blacken out. This is all very ominous, and it's also a little ridiculous, but it's even more ridiculous when the West Texas Rednecks theme music plays afterwards for the next match. The following week, another version of the promo aired. This time the kid was playing with some toys and he picked up a building block with the number 7 on it. Dustin floats up to the window and it seems like he and the kid can now telepathically speak to each other. The kid wants to know when their journey will begin. And Seven says, "On the 7th day, the reign of terror and darkness begins." Seven then says, "Fear me you will, stop me you will not," as he floats away from the window once again. And then the promo stopped. Nothing else aired, and viewers would have to wait until the 7th day before they saw Seven, even though he showed up on the 8th of November edition of Nitro. The lights go out on this edition of Monday Nitro and a voice says, "Fear me you will," and it really does sound like Ole Anderson's Shockmaster voice here. We see Seven standing at the entranceway and he levitates. Seven is floating all the way down to the ring as fans wonder what the hell is going on. Once inside the squared circle, Dustin Rhodes grabs a microphone and he says, "Turn off the music now. I want everybody in here to take a good look at the crap I'm in. I left the World Wrestling Federation for gimmicks like this. For all of you that don't know, I was Goldust, and Goldust sucked. Goldust nearly ruined my wrestling career. You see, I wanted to come back to WCW because this is home for me, and I wanted to be me, just me, because that's what I can do, just be me. But the powers that be came to me and they said, Dustin, you know, Dustin sucks. Dustin is boring. So I'm here now, I stand before you. Oh, my new name is Seven, by the way. They've dressed me up like Uncle Fester to play trick or treat all year long. Powers that be, what you can do is take Goldust and shove it up your ass. You can take this silly looking thing, Seven, and shove it up your ass. And you can both kiss my ass. Now, last week, my father called me Dustin Rhodes, and it seems that he's no longer with this company after 25 years of building everything that you see right here, and right now, they kicked him to the curb like he was a piece of shit. Well, powers that be, that doesn't cut the mustard, and now you got to deal with me because you disrespected my father, you disrespected the Rhodes name, and you disrespected me for the last damn time. You understand? So, from this moment on, tonight, and the rest of your lives, I'm going to make your life a miserable hell. I'm going to make WCW a miserable hell, and TNT too. So, boys, I know you're back there. You know one thing, tonight and forevermore, you will never ever forget the name of Dustin Rhodes. Okay, so what happened here and why did this turn into a Goldust and WWF burial? Well, Dusty Rhodes did indeed get fired shortly before Dustin made his debut, but that wasn't the legitimate reason for the cancellation of the Seven character. Turner Broadcasting had their own standards and practices, and Turner Broadcasting thought that fans would, get this, misinterpret the Seven character as a child abductor due to the promos that aired before his debut. It wasn't WCW, Vince Russo or Dustin Rhodes who wiped the character out of existence, but rather it was Turner Broadcasting themselves. I guess they spent so much money on the entrance that they had to do it at least once before Seven disappeared forever. But yeah, Seven was cancelled because of those promos just like that. The whole shoot promo thing afterwards is just typical Vince Russo stuff that people shouldn't put too much stock into, but that doesn't make the whole Seven debut any less of a wrestling curiosity, and it also shows how WCW couldn't just write anything they wanted and expect it to make it past Turner's standards and practices department. Whether you think this was a restriction on creativity or a thank God for that moment is up to you. It's so cliched though to bury the opposition, and it feels like Russo had no idea how to cancel the gimmick, so he just decided that Dustin should cut a worked shoot promo and talk bad about the WWF and the Goldust gimmick, a gimmick that, like it or not, brought Dustin a lot of success. Keep in mind too that the Seven character was Dustin's idea, as confirmed by a tweet that he sent out last year, so we can't rip on Russo for coming up with it. We can, however, rip into Russo for turning it all into yet another worked shoot. It also appears that it was Russo who first approached Dustin in regards to cancelling the gimmick, and maybe Russo kept quiet about it being an issue with standards and practices. It would take Dustin a further month before he got a match on WCW Nitro. Keep in mind that Nitro was a 3-hour broadcast at this time, so why he couldn't have been slotted in before the 6th of December is anyone's guess, though he did have a few run-ins beforehand. Hardly making life hell for the powers that be, but anyway, Dustin went up against Ming, and if you thought WCW were going to go all the way with Dustin Rhodes in 1999, then you'd be very much mistaken. Jeff Jarrett and the Outsiders hit the ring and Dustin took a jackknife powerbomb. Dustin was pretty much destroyed in his first TV match back in WCW. On the following episode of Thunder, Dustin teamed up with Sid Vicious and Chris Benoit to take on Nash, Hall and Jeff Jarrett in a 6-man tag, and Dustin was on the losing side here. And then, on the December 16th, 1999 episode of Thunder, the Seven character actually made a comeback, though not in the way you might think. During a match with Curt Hennig, Dustin was shocked to see Seven float down to the ring while the fans just couldn't care less. The lights go out and when they come back, Seven is standing in the ring with a guitar, completely giving away that this is Jeff Jarrett. Dustin takes a guitar shot to the head before Double J lays in a beating, and this brings us to Starrcade and the Bunkhouse Brawl. Double J wanted to beat Dustin in a match that Dusty Rhodes made famous, kinda like the ultimate way to show Dustin and all the other old-timers of WCW that this is a new era of World Championship Wrestling, and this young, new upcomer known as Jeff Jarrett was going to lead the pack. Now, to be fair, this match actually starts out pretty good, and I know no one wants to give credit to Jeff Jarrett for anything, especially during this WCW run of his, but Rhodes vs Jarrett at Starrcade 99 was a decent brawl, that is until Curt Hennig interferes and then it kinda goes downhill. Dustin loses the match and Double J even came out again later in the evening to wrestle a ladder match against Chris Benoit for the US title. Jarrett lost, but still, it highlights where Dustin Rhodes stood in the pecking order around this time period. Who knows if the Seven character would have made a difference, but I seriously doubt it. Dustin is extremely versatile and he made the Goldust character work. That in itself is pretty amazing, but you have to remember we're talking about late 1999 WCW here. Guitar on a pole matches would follow for Dustin Rhodes, and no, I'm not joking either. Double J vs Dustin Rhodes in a series of pole matches took place on the house show loop, with Dustin wrestling no matches at all on TV during the month of January. A few appearances on Thunder and Nitro would lead to Dustin beginning a short-lived rivalry with Terry Funk, resulting in a bull rope I Quit match taking place at WCW Uncensored 2000. Rhodes turned heel for this feud. He and Funk had been associates and Dustin even brought Funk to the ring for a match against Ric Flair at Super Brawl, but Dustin turned on Funk the next night on Monday Nitro. After the heel turn for a week or two, Dustin was called the American Dream 2000, and again, I'm not joking. Check out the 28th of February and the 6th of March episodes of Nitro in 2000 if you want to see Dustin getting called the American Dream 2000. And then Dustin would get the moniker of American Nightmare, so Dustin used the American Nightmare name a long time before his little brother Cody. The Funk vs Rhodes match at Uncensored is nothing to write home about, unfortunately, and it's a real shame too. You really want to see the toughness of Terry Funk in every match he's in, but when you've got a guy in a chicken outfit becoming a focal point of the match, you just know you're in for a bad time. Dustin ends up getting the win, though you can definitely skip this one, you're not missing much. We've strayed way past the Seven stuff at this point, so I guess it's best to wrap things up here. Dustin's return to WCW was not what he or anyone else expected in the end, and it's a shining example of how outside forces can control creativity within wrestling for the good and for the bad. I showed the Seven vignettes to a few friends who don't care for wrestling at all, and they all had more or less the same reaction. They wondered what horror movie it was from. They didn't really come up with any abduction scenarios or anything like that. And when I asked if they thought it was inappropriate in any way, they pretty much said, no, it's just a movie. I can definitely see why Turner's standards and practices thought the way they did, but that makeup job from Dustin Rhodes instantly makes you know that this isn't real. It's on a wrestling show, for crying out loud. So I'm not sure if the whole thing should have been completely squashed the way it was. If Dustin was standing there without the makeup on, then yeah, that would have been kinda weird, but it's a ridiculous cartoon character here with an over-exaggerated creepy voice. People can separate fact from fiction, including people that watch wrestling shows, so I don't know, to me it's more silly than actually disturbing. Runnels got a decent little run out of WCW afterwards, though admittedly it was nothing special. He disappeared again in mid-2000 only to re-emerge in 2001, and from here Dustin would stay with World Championship Wrestling until the WWF buyout. He would allow the WWF to buy his WCW contract to begin work with Vince McMahon once again. And yeah, that was that really. The whole Seven thing though has lived on in infamy. Another one of those incidents within wrestling that gets more attention than what it probably deserves due to the Russo style worked shoot promo that Dustin delivered after the character's debut, and it serves as another good example of why WCW was going down the toilet during this era of professional wrestling. I hope you enjoyed this video, thank you for watching, and take care.